The lights in the breeding hall were bright and cold. Master Breeder Vexenara walked slowly between the rows of glass containers, each one holding a dragon egg. Her scales were dark green and they caught the light as she moved. She was checking each egg, making notes on her datapad. Everything had to be perfect. The Draken Consortium did not accept anything less than perfect. Today was hatching day for clutch 743. Vexenara stopped at each container and watched as the baby dragons broke through their shells. One by one they emerged. Strong legs, long wings, sharp claws. Each one was exactly as it should be. The consortium had been breeding dragons for war and glory for thousands of years. They knew what they were doing. But then Vexenara reached the last container. She stopped walking. Her eyes narrowed. Inside the glass, a small dragon was struggling with his shell. He was taking much longer than the others. When he finally broke free and tumbled onto the soft bedding, Vexenara made a sound of disgust. The baby dragon was wrong. He was much smaller than his brothers and sisters. His legs were short and thick. His wings were too small for his body. He looked up at Vexenara with bright gold eyes, but she did not see beauty there. She only saw failure. Genetic defect, she said to her assistant, a younger dragon named Krell. This one has the dwarf condition. He will never fly. He will never fight in battle. He is useless to us. Krell looked at the small dragon with pity, but he said nothing. He knew what came next. Defective hatchlings were always destroyed. It was the way things had always been done. Prepare the termination chamber, Vexenara ordered. We will dispose of this one before the day is over. But someone else was watching. High above the breeding hall, behind a glass window, a human man stood in the observation area. His name was Jake Mitchell. He was 32 years old with brown hair and kind eyes. He wore old work clothes covered in grease and oil stains. Jake was a mechanic. He fixed broken machines on the space station. He had been hired to repair the air systems in the breeding hall, and he had been watching the dragons hatch while he worked. Jake pressed his hand against the glass. He had seen what happened with the small dragon. He had seen the way Vexenara looked at him. Jake knew that look. It was the look someone gave to trash, to something that needed to be thrown away. But when Jake looked at the small dragon, he did not see trash. He saw a baby who needed help. He saw someone who deserved a chance to live. Jake left the observation area and ran down the stairs to the breeding hall. The doors were locked, but he knocked hard until someone opened them. Krell stood in the doorway, looking surprised. I am sorry, but you cannot be here, Krell said. This is a restricted area. I need to talk to Vexenara, Jake said. He pushed past Krell and walked into the hall. Vexenara turned to look at him, her expression cold and angry. What is the meaning of this intrusion? She demanded. Jake pointed at the small dragon, who was now sitting in the corner of his container, looking confused and scared. That dragon. The small one. What are you going to do with him? That is none of your concern, human, Vexenara replied. That creature is defective. It will be terminated within the hour. No, Jake said firmly. I want him. The room went silent. Vexenara stared at Jake as if he had lost his mind. Krell's mouth fell open in shock. Even the other dragons in the room seemed to pause and watch. You want it? Vexenara repeated slowly. You want to take a failed hatchling? Why would you do such a foolish thing? Jake walked over to the container and looked down at the small dragon. The dragon looked back at him. Their eyes met and something passed between them. Understanding, connection, hope. Because everyone deserves a chance, Jake said simply. I will take him off your hands. You won't have to deal with him anymore. Just give him to me. Vexenara considered this. She did not understand humans and their strange emotions. But if this foolish man wanted to take the defective hatchling, it would save her the paperwork of a termination. The consortium would not care what happened to a failed specimen, as long as it was gone from their records. Very well, she said after a long pause. You may have it. Sign the release forms and take it away. I never want to see that creature again. Jake signed the papers quickly, his hand shaking slightly with nervousness. What was he doing? He lived alone in a small apartment above his repair shop. He had never taken care of a dragon before. He had never taken care of any pet before. But somehow, looking at the small dragon, he knew this was the right thing to do. Krell opened the container and carefully lifted the dragon out. The little creature weighed almost nothing. His scales were a deep red color with hints of gold, and they were warm to the touch. Krell handed him to Jake, who tucked the dragon inside his jacket to keep him safe and warm. "Good luck, human," Krell whispered. "You will need it." Jake nodded and left the breeding hall as quickly as he could. He did not want to give Vexenara time to change her mind. He walked through the corridors of Drakmore Station. The dragon pressed against his chest. He could feel the little heart beating fast, could feel the tiny body trembling with fear and cold. "It's okay," Jake whispered. "You're safe now. I've got you." The journey back to Horizon Hub took 3 hours by transport ship. Jake sat in the back of the passenger cabin, keeping his jacket closed so no one would see what he was carrying. The dragon stayed quiet the whole time, as if he understood that they needed to be careful. When they finally arrived at Horizon Hub, Jake hurried to his shop. The station was busy as always, with aliens and humans walking in every direction, but no one paid attention to one mechanic returning from a job. Jake unlocked his shop door and went inside, finally letting himself relax. He opened his jacket and lifted the dragon out. The little creature looked around at his new home with wide eyes. The shop was messy, full of tools and machine parts and half-finished projects, but it was warm and safe. "Welcome home," Jake said softly. "You need a name." "How about Ember? Because your scales glow like little embers when the light hits them." The dragon, now called Ember, chirped softly. It was a happy sound. Jake smiled and set Ember down on his workbench. The little dragon immediately started exploring, sniffing at tools and poking at spare parts with curious claws. Jake watched him and felt his heart grow warm. Maybe he did not know anything about raising dragons. Maybe this was the craziest thing he had ever done. But looking at Ember, seeing the joy in those gold eyes, Jake knew he had made the right choice. The Draken Consortium had looked at Ember and seen only failure. They had seen something that did not fit their perfect plans, and they had wanted to destroy it. But Jake looked at Ember and saw possibility. He saw life. He saw someone worth saving. Over the next few days, Jake worked on making the shop comfortable for Ember. He cleared out a storage room and filled it with soft blankets. He set up heating lamps because dragons needed warmth. He bought food from the station market, trying to figure out what baby dragons ate. It was not easy, but Jake was patient. Ember grew stronger each day. He followed Jake everywhere, watching everything the mechanic did with intense interest. When Jake worked on repairing engines, Ember would sit nearby and observe. When Jake ate his meals, Ember would eat too, mimicking Jake's movements. One week after Jake brought Ember home, his friend Danny Cruz came to visit. Danny was another mechanic who worked on the station. He was a short man with black hair and a friendly smile. But when he saw Ember, his smile faded into shock. "Jake," Danny said slowly, "please tell me that is not what I think it is." "It's a dragon," Jake said cheerfully. "His name is Ember." "I can see that it's a dragon," Danny replied. "What I mean is, why do you have a dragon in your shop? Those things are dangerous. They are bred for war." Jake picked up Ember and held him in his arms. The dragon nuzzled against his chest, content and peaceful. "Does he look dangerous to you?" Danny had to admit that Ember looked more cute than dangerous. The little dragon was barely bigger than a house cat, and his short legs made him look clumsy rather than threatening. But Danny was still worried. "Jake, what are you going to do when he grows up? Dragons get huge, and they breathe fire, and they are loyal to the consortium, not to humans." "Ember is different," Jake said firmly. "He was born with a condition that makes him smaller. He will never be a war dragon. The consortium was going to kill him because he did not fit their standards. I saved him." Danny looked at his friend for a long moment. He knew Jake had a good heart, perhaps too good sometimes, but he also knew that arguing would not change Jake's mind once he had decided something. "Okay," Danny said finally, "but don't say I didn't warn you. And if he sets your shop on fire, I am not helping you rebuild." Jake laughed. "Deal." As the days turned into weeks, Ember became part of life on Horizon Hub. Jake took him everywhere. The little dragon loved riding on Jake's shoulder, watching the busy station with curious eyes. Some people thought Ember was adorable. Others thought Jake was crazy for keeping a dragon as a companion. But Jake did not care what others thought. What mattered was that Ember was happy. What mattered was that Ember was alive. And as Jake watched the little dragon play with a wrench that was almost as big as he was, Jake knew that saving Ember had been the best decision he had ever made. 6 months had passed since Jake brought Ember home. The little dragon had grown, but not in the way most dragons grew. He was still small, still had short legs and undersized wings, but he was healthy and happy, and that was all that mattered to Jake. Something unexpected had happened during those 6 months. Amber had become interested in Jake's work. Very interested. At first, Jake thought the dragon just enjoyed being near him, but slowly Jake realized that Ember was actually learning. The dragon watched everything Jake did with intense focus. He studied how machines worked. He learned which tools did what. One day, Jake was working on a broken engine from a cargo ship. He needed a specific wrench, and he reached for it without looking. But before his hand found the tool, Ember had already picked it up with his claws and handed it to Jake. Jake stopped working and stared at the dragon. "Did you just give me the exact tool I needed?" Ember chirped happily and wagged his tail. From that day forward, Ember became Jake's assistant. The dragon had small, nimble claws that could reach into tight spaces. He had natural resistance to heat, so he could work near hot engines without protection. And most surprisingly, he had an instinct for finding problems that even Jake sometimes missed. Word spread quickly around Horizon Hub. People started talking about the mechanic with the dragon helper. At first, some customers were nervous. They did not want a dragon near their expensive ships. But after Ember helped fix a few difficult problems, those customers became believers. The real test came when Captain Velcor arrived at the shop. He was a Centauran, which meant he looked like a human but with blue skin and 4 arms. He owned a luxury passenger ship called the Starlight Empress, and he was desperate. "I have been to 3 different repair shops," Velcor explained to Jake. "No one can find what is wrong with my ship. The engines will not start, but all the diagnostic tests say everything is fine. I'm losing money every day the ship sits in dock." Jake nodded. "Bring her into the main bay. We will take a look." Velcor hesitated when he saw Ember sitting on Jake's workbench. "Is that dragon going to be working on my ship?" "He is my best technician," Jake said with a smile. "Trust me." The Starlight Empress was a beautiful ship, sleek and expensive. Jake and Ember spent the first hour running tests. Everything looked perfect. The reactor was working. The power lines were good. The fuel system was clean. But the engines would not fire up. Jake scratched his head, puzzled. This made no sense. Ember, meanwhile, had wandered away from Jake's side. The dragon was sniffing the air, his nose twitching. He moved through the engine room slowly, as if following a scent that only he could detect. Jake was too focused on his diagnostic pad to notice at first, but then he heard Ember making urgent chirping sounds. The dragon was scratching at a wall panel, the same spot over and over again. "Ember, not now," Jake called out. "I am trying to think," but Ember did not stop. He scratched harder and chirped louder. Finally, Jake walked over to see what had the dragon so worked up. "What is it, buddy? What do you see?" Jake examined the wall panel. It looked completely normal, but Ember was insistent, so Jake removed the panel to look behind it. At first, he saw nothing wrong. Then he looked closer and saw something that made his eyes go wide. There was a nest of tiny bugs eating the insulation around a power conduit. They were silicon eaters, rare pests that could damage ship systems. The damage was so small that the diagnostic tools had not picked it up, but it was enough to create a tiny power fluctuation that prevented the engines from starting. Jake cleared out the bugs and replaced the damaged section. Then he went back to the control panel and tried starting the engines. They roared to life immediately, running smooth and perfect. Captain Velcor was amazed. "How did you find that? Those bugs are nearly impossible to detect." Jake pointed at Ember, who was sitting nearby, looking proud of himself. "He found it. He has a nose for problems." Velcor looked at the little dragon with new respect. "Incredible. I have never seen anything like this." He paid Jake twice the normal fee and promised to tell everyone he knew about the shop. And he kept that promise. Within weeks, Jake's shop was busier than it had ever been. Ship captains from all over the sector came to Horizon Hub, specifically to have their vessels repaired by the human mechanic and his dragon. Some came because they had problems no one else could solve. Others came just because they wanted to meet Ember. Jake hired 2 helpers to keep up with all the work. The first was Kelly Barnes, a young human woman who was great with electrical systems. She had red hair and freckles and a quick smile. The second was Pex, a Trill engineer who specialized in engines. Trills had spotted skin and were known for being careful and precise workers. Both Kelly and Pex were nervous about working with a dragon at first, but Ember won them over quickly. The dragon loved teaching them things he had learned. He would demonstrate how to angle your body to reach a difficult bolt, or how to listen to an engine to hear what was wrong with it. He is smarter than half the engineers I went to school with, Kelly said one day, watching Ember carefully remove a delicate sensor without damaging it. Pex agreed. I have worked with many beings in my career. Few have shown the natural understanding that Ember has. He does not just follow instructions. He thinks about why things work the way they do. Life was good. The shop was successful. Ember was happy and healthy. Jake felt like he had made the right choice that day at the breeding hall. He had saved a life, and that life had turned out to be special, but not everyone was happy about Ember's success. Back at Drakmore Station, Master Breeder Vexenara had heard the stories. She heard about the defective hatchling that was thriving in the care of a human. She heard about the dragon that could repair ships and solve problems that trained engineers could not solve, and she was furious. This is an insult to everything we stand for, she told Korth, one of her senior warriors. That failed specimen should have been destroyed. Now it makes us look foolish. People are saying that our standards are wrong, that we waste valuable resources by eliminating imperfect hatchlings. Korth was a massive dragon, twice the size of a normal adult. His scales were black as night and his eyes were cold. What would you have me do, Master Breeder? Go to Horizon Hub, Vexenara ordered. Watch the human and his pet. When the opportunity comes, take the hatchling back. We will deal with it properly this time. Korth bowed and left to carry out his orders. Meanwhile, on Horizon Hub, Jake received a visitor he was not expecting. A woman named Lisa Grant knocked on his shop door one morning. She was a reporter for the Galactic News Network, the biggest news organization in known space. I would like to do a story about you and Ember, Lisa explained. She had blonde hair and carried a recording device. Your story is inspirational. A dragon born different, rejected by his own kind, finding purpose and success in an unexpected way. People need to hear this, Jake was not sure. He did not want Ember to become a spectacle, some kind of curiosity for people to gawk at. But Lisa convinced him that the story could help others. There are beings all over the galaxy who are born different, Lisa said. They are rejected, told they are worthless, cast aside. Your story shows that those judgments are wrong, that everyone has value if given the chance to show it. Jake thought about his own childhood. He remembered being the smallest kid in his class, the one picked last for teams, the one everyone said would not amount to much. He knew what it felt like to be judged and dismissed. If sharing Ember's story could help others, then maybe it was worth doing. Okay, Jake agreed, but we do this on our terms. No tricks, no making Ember look like a freak. You show the truth. Lisa smiled. That is exactly what I want to show. The interview took place in the shop. Lisa asked Jake questions about how he met Ember, about their life together, about the work they did. She filmed Ember working on a ship engine, his small body moving confidently through the machinery. She captured the bond between the human and the dragon, the way they worked together without needing words. The story aired 3 days later, and it spread across the galactic network like wildfire. Millions of beings watched it. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from every corner of known space. Parents of children born with differences wrote to thank Jake for showing their kids that being different did not mean being less. Beings who had been rejected by their own cultures wrote to say that Ember gave them hope, but the attention also brought danger. Korth arrived at Horizon Hub the day after the story aired. The massive dragon walked through the station, drawing stares from everyone he passed. He went straight to Jake's shop and pushed through the door without knocking. Jake looked up from his work and froze. He had never seen a dragon this big before. Korth had to duck to fit through the doorway, and his presence filled the entire shop. I am here for the defective hatchling, Korth announced in a deep, rumbling voice. Surrender it and there will be no trouble. Ember, who had been working in the corner, scrambled over to Jake's side. The little dragon pressed against Jake's leg, his body tense with fear. He might be small, but he recognized a predator when he saw one. Jake stepped in front of Ember, shielding him with his body. Ember is not going anywhere. He is under my protection. Korth's eyes narrowed. You do not understand, human. That creature is an embarrassment to the Draken people. It should have. The days following Korth's visit were tense. Jake hired extra security for the shop and made sure someone was always with Ember. Danny, Kelly, and Pex took turns staying overnight, refusing to leave Jake and Ember alone. The small community that had formed around the repair shop had become like family, and families protected their own. Captain Helen Morris, the chief of station security, came by to talk with Jake. She was a tough woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had been a military officer before retiring to work on Horizon Hub. "I heard about your visitor," Helen said, sitting across from Jake in the shop's small office. "Korth is still on the station. He has rented quarters in the visitor section and seems to be watching your shop. Can you make him leave?" Jake asked. Helen shook her head. "He has not broken any laws. As long as he pays his docking fees and does not cause trouble, he has the right to be here. But I have assigned extra patrols to this area. If he tries anything, my people will respond immediately." It was not much comfort, but it was something. Jake thanked Helen and went back to work. He tried to maintain normal routines for Ember's sake. The dragon was stressed enough without sensing Jake's own fear. 2 weeks after Korth arrived, the annual Horizon Hub Trade Festival began. It was the biggest event of the year, drawing thousands of visitors from across the sector. The station became even more crowded than usual, filled with merchants selling goods, performers entertaining crowds, and displays showing off new technologies. The festival organizers had invited Jake to demonstrate Ember's repair skills at the Technology Pavilion. It was a huge honor and would bring great publicity to the shop. Jake had initially refused, worried about Ember's safety in such a public setting. But the organizers offered a substantial fee, and the exposure could lead to even better contracts. After discussing it with Danny, Kelly, and Pex, Jake decided to accept. They would all go together and keep close watch on Ember. What could go wrong at a public event with thousands of witnesses? The Technology Pavilion was a massive domed structure in the station's central plaza. Inside, dozens of different species showed off their latest inventions and innovations. There were new engine designs, advanced medical devices, revolutionary farming equipment, and much more. Jake's demonstration was scheduled for the afternoon of the festival's second day. When they arrived at the pavilion, Jake was amazed by the size of the crowd. Hundreds of beings had gathered to watch the various demonstrations. News of Ember had spread far beyond Horizon Hub, and many visitors had come specifically to see the famous dragon mechanic. The organizers had arranged a challenge for Ember. A cargo loading machine had broken down, and 3 different engineering teams had failed to fix it. The machine sat in the center of the demonstration area, silent and useless. If Ember could repair it, it would prove his abilities to everyone watching. Jake knelt down next to Ember and spoke quietly to him. "No pressure, buddy. Just do what you always do. Figure out what is wrong and fix it. I will be right here if you need me." Ember chirped softly and touched his nose to Jake's hand. Then the little dragon walked over to the broken machine and began his inspection. The crowd fell silent, watching every move the small dragon made. Ember circled the machine slowly, examining it from every angle. He tapped on panels with his claws, listening to the sounds they made. He sniffed at joints and connections, using his sensitive nose to detect problems. He climbed up and looked inside access ports, his small size allowing him to see things larger beings could not. 20 minutes passed. The crowd began to murmur. Some wondered if the dragon was actually capable of fixing the machine, or if this was all an act. Others remained patient, trusting in what they had heard about Ember's abilities. Then Ember stopped at a specific point on the machine's base. He scratched at a panel, then looked back at Jake and chirped urgently. Jake came over with a toolkit, and Ember selected a specific wrench. Working together, they removed the panel. Inside, Jake could see a gyroscopic stabilizer, a device that helped the machine balance heavy loads. Jake examined it closely and realized it was misaligned by just a few degrees. It was such a small problem that most diagnostic tools would not catch it, but that tiny misalignment was enough to prevent the entire machine from operating. Jake adjusted the stabilizer while Ember held the panel open. When everything was back in place and the panel was secured, Jake stepped back and activated the machine. It hummed to life perfectly, its loading arms moving smoothly through their full range of motion. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Beings of every species clapped, whistled, or made whatever sound their kind used to show appreciation. Ember stood on his back legs and chirped happily, clearly pleased with himself. Jake grinned and picked up Ember, holding him high so everyone could see. "Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Ember." The applause grew even louder. People surged forward, wanting to meet Ember and congratulate Jake. Security had to form a barrier to prevent the crowd from overwhelming them. Kelly, Danny, and Peck stood nearby, beaming with pride. But in the chaos and celebration, no one noticed Korth moving through the crowd. The massive dragon had been watching from the back of the pavilion, waiting for exactly this moment. Security was focused on crowd control. Jake was distracted by all the attention. It was the perfect opportunity. Korth pushed through the crowd, using his size and strength to shove beings aside. He moved quickly, his eyes locked on Ember. Before anyone realized what was happening, Korth reached out and grabbed Ember by the back of the neck. Ember let out a roar of shock and fear. Jake spun around, but Korth was already moving toward the pavilion's back exit. The big dragon held Ember tight, preventing him from escaping. "Stop," Jake shouted, but his voice was lost in the noise of the crowd. Kelly saw what was happening. She had been standing near the demonstration table, and without thinking, she grabbed the heaviest tool she could find, a large wrench made of dense metal. She threw it with all her strength, aiming not at Korth's head but at his arm, the one holding Ember. The wrench flew through the air and struck Korth's forearm with a solid thunk. The impact made Korth's grip loosen just enough. Ember twisted violently and managed to pull free. He fell several feet and landed hard on the pavilion floor, his short legs unable to absorb the fall properly. But he scrambled to his feet and ran as fast as he could back toward Jake. Now people realized something was wrong. Security guards pushed through the crowd, drawing their weapons. Korth found himself surrounded by armed officers and hundreds of angry witnesses. He could fight, but that would only make things worse. "Stand down," Captain Helen Morris commanded, arriving with more security personnel. "You are under arrest for attempted kidnapping." Korth considered his options. He was a warrior trained for combat, and these security guards would be easy to defeat. But there were too many witnesses. The diplomatic fallout would be severe. Reluctantly, he allowed himself to be restrained. Jake scooped up Ember and held him close, checking for injuries. The little dragon was shaken but unhurt. His scales were scraped from the fall, but nothing was broken. "Are you okay?" "Are you hurt?" Jake asked frantically. Ember pressed his head against Jake's chest and made soft, frightened sounds. Jake held him tighter, whispering reassurances. Kelly ran over, her face pale. "I am so sorry. I should have been watching him. I should have noticed Korth earlier." "You saved him," Jake said, his voice shaking with emotion. "If you had not thrown that wrench, Korth would have taken Ember. You saved him, Kelly." Danny and Pex arrived, both looking worried and angry. The entire pavilion had descended into chaos. The festival organizers were trying to calm people down. Security was escorting Korth away in restraints. Reporters were recording everything, their cameras capturing the drama. Captain Morris came over to Jake. "I need you to come to the security office and make a formal statement. We are charging Korth with attempted kidnapping, assault, and disturbing the peace." Jake nodded, still holding Ember. "What about the consortium? They sent him. This is not over." "That is a matter for the Galactic Commerce Guild now," Helen replied grimly. "This incident happened at a public festival with thousands of witnesses. It is a diplomatic situation now, and it is beyond my authority. But I promise you, Jake, we will do everything we can to protect you and Ember." The news of the incident spread even faster than the original story about Ember. Within hours, every major news network in the galaxy was reporting on the attempted kidnapping. Public opinion turned sharply against the Draken Consortium. How could they try to take a sentient being by force? How could they value genetic perfection over life itself? The consortium tried to defend their actions. They claimed Ember was their property, that Jake had stolen him, that they were simply reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. But their arguments fell flat in the face of public outrage. Beings from dozens of species spoke out in support of Jake and, Ember. A social media movement started with the tag "Stand with Ember." Donations poured in to help cover legal expenses. Artists created pictures and videos celebrating the little dragon who had overcome so much. But the most important support came from within the Draken species itself. A young breeder named Sintara, who had witnessed Ember be. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after the festival incident. Those 3 weeks felt like the longest of Jake's life. He worked in the shop during the day, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy for Ember's sake. But at night he lay awake worrying about what would happen if they lost. Velsara, his lawyer, visited the shop several times to prepare. She was a Centauran woman with 4 arms and sharp intelligence. She had represented many difficult cases before the Galactic Commerce Guild, and she had a reputation for winning against long odds. The key is proving Ember's personhood, Velsera explained during one of their meetings. Under guild law, sentient beings have rights that cannot be violated, but the definition of sentience is complex. The consortium will argue that Ember is simply a well-trained animal, no different from a pet that has learned tricks. But he is more than that, Jake protested. He solves problems. He learns new things on his own. He has emotions and personality. I know, Velsera said calmly, and we will prove it. But we must be prepared for the consortium's arguments. They have hired expensive lawyers, and they will attack every point we make. The day of the hearing finally arrived. The Galactic Commerce Guild used the largest assembly chamber on Horizon Hub for important legal proceedings. The room could hold over 1,000 beings, and it was completely full. News crews from across the galaxy had set up cameras to broadcast the hearing live. Jake walked into the chamber with Ember at his side. The little dragon wore a special harness that Jake had made, one that displayed his name and identified him as Jake's companion. Ember looked nervous, his gold eyes darting around at all the strange faces watching them. "It is okay, buddy," Jake whispered. "Just stay close to me. We will get through this together." They took their seats at one table. Across from them sat Korth and a team of 4 Draken lawyers, all looking confident and aggressive. Behind them sat Master Breeder Vexnara, her expression cold and triumphant. She clearly expected to win this case. At the front of the chamber sat the judge, an ancient being called Korthex. He was a Zentari, a species made of living crystal that sparkled in the light. Zentari were known for their wisdom and fairness, which gave Jake some hope. At least the judge would listen to both sides. Judge Korthex called the hearing to order. His voice came through translation devices and filled the chamber. "We are here to determine the legal status of the dragon known as Ember. The Draken Consortium claims ownership based on breeding rights. Jake Mitchell claims adoption rights and argues for Ember's recognition as a sentient being. We will hear from both sides, and I will make a judgment based on the evidence and the law." The consortium's lead lawyer, a dragon named Torvon, stood up first. He was tall and imposing, with dark blue scales and a voice that commanded attention. "Your Honor, this case is very simple," Torvon began. "Ember was created in consortium facilities using consortium genetic material. He is consortium property. Jake Mitchell removed him without proper authorization. This is theft, pure and simple. We request that Ember be returned immediately and that Jake Mitchell face criminal charges." Velsera stood smoothly. "Your Honor, my opponent conveniently ignores several important facts. First, Ember was designated for termination. The consortium had abandoned any claim to him. Second, Jake Mitchell's adoption was conducted with the full knowledge of consortium personnel who were present. Third, and most important, this case treats Ember as an object when he is clearly a sentient being deserving of legal personhood." The word personhood caused murmurs throughout the chamber. It was a bold claim, one that could change everything if accepted. Judge Korthex leaned forward, his crystalline body catching the light. "That is a significant claim, Advocate Velsera. You will need to provide strong evidence to support it." "I am prepared to do so, Your Honor," Velsera replied. "I called Jake Mitchell to testify." Jake took the witness stand, his heart pounding. He had never been comfortable speaking in front of crowds, but this was too important to let fear stop him. Velsera asked him questions about Ember's behavior, his learning abilities, his problem-solving skills. Jake described how Ember had found the mite infestation on the Starlight Empress, how he had taught himself to use tools, how he showed emotions and formed relationships. "In your professional opinion as an engineer," Velsera asked, "does Ember demonstrate intelligence equal to other recognized sentient species?" "Yes," Jake answered firmly. "Ember understands cause and effect. He learns from experience. He shows creativity when solving problems. He is not just following trained behaviors. He thinks." Torvon stood up for cross-examination. "Mr. Mitchell, is it not true that you have an emotional attachment to this creature that might affect your judgment? That you might see intelligence where there is only animal instinct?" "I see what is really there," Jake replied. "Ember is not just some animal. He is my friend and my partner. He has earned that through his own abilities, not because I am imagining things." "So you admit you consider this creature a friend?" Torvald said with satisfaction. You have formed an emotional bond that prevents you from being objective. Having emotions does not make someone wrong, Jake shot back. It makes them human. And Ember has emotions too. That is part of what makes him a person. The testimony continued for hours. The consortium called their own witnesses, including Vexnara. She spoke about dragon breeding in cold clinical terms. She described Ember's genetic defect and explained why such specimens were always terminated. This creature was never meant to exist, Vexnara stated. It is an error, a mistake in our breeding program. We eliminate such errors because they weaken our species. Allowing them to live sends the wrong message. Judge Corthex studied her carefully. Master Breeder, you speak of weakness and strength as if they are the only measures of value. But sentient beings are more than their physical abilities. Do you not see the problem with your philosophy? Vexnara's expression remained cold. I see reality, Your Honor. The universe does not care about our feelings. Only the strong survive. That is the truth. More witnesses testified on both sides. Kelly Barnes described watching Ember work and learning from him. Danny Cruz explained how Ember had become part of their community. Captain Velcor, the owner of the Starlight Empress, testified about how Ember had solved a problem that trained engineers could not. But the consortium had witnesses too. They brought in genetic scientists who explained why certain traits were eliminated from breeding programs. They called military commanders who described the specific roles dragons were meant to fill. They painted a picture of a society built on strict standards and rigid order. As the day wore on, Jake began to feel discouraged. The consortium's arguments were powerful. They had the weight of tradition and law behind them. What did he have? Just his belief that one small dragon deserved a chance to live. Then Velsera made her boldest move. Your Honor, I request that Ember be allowed to demonstrate his abilities directly to the court. Let him show that he is more than property, that he is a thinking being. Torvald objected immediately. This is ridiculous. The creature cannot speak. How can he testify? He does not need words, Velsera replied. Intelligence can be demonstrated through action. I propose we present Ember with a complex problem, one that requires genuine thought to solve. If he succeeds, it will prove he is more than a trained animal. Judge Corthex considered this carefully. It was an unusual request, but these were unusual circumstances. What kind of problem do you propose? A mechanical failure that experienced engineers have been unable to solve, Velsera answered. If Ember can diagnose and repair the problem working independently, it will demonstrate the cognitive abilities required for personhood status. After some debate, the judge agreed. During a recess, station engineers brought in a broken shuttle engine. The problem was deliberately obscure, a cascading failure caused by a manufacturing defect in a component that seemed unrelated to the main issue. 3 different engineering teams had examined it over the past week without finding the cause. When the hearing resumed, the engine sat in the middle of the chamber floor. Ember looked at it, then looked at Jake. You can do this, buddy, Jake said quietly. Just do what you always do. Take your time and think it through. Ember walked over to the engine alone. Jake wanted desperately to help him to guide him, but Velsera had been clear. Ember had to work independently to prove his intelligence was real. The chamber fell silent. Hundreds of beings watched as the small dragon began his inspection. He moved around the engine, examining it from every angle. He tapped on panels with his claws, listening. He sniffed at connections using his sensitive nose. He climbed up and looked inside access points. An hour passed. Then another. Some in the audience grew restless, whispering that this was taking too long. But Ember kept working, his concentration absolute. He was following the logic of the machine, tracing how each system connected to the others. Finally, Ember stopped at a specific component deep inside the engine. He looked at it for a long time, then looked back at Jake. Their eyes met, and Jake understood. Ember had found the problem, but it was in a location he could not reach with his short legs and small body. Jake's heart sank. Had they come so far only to fail because of Ember's? The news of Judge Corthex's decision spread across the galaxy within minutes. The reaction was immediate and powerful. Millions of beings celebrated the ruling as a victory for individual rights and dignity. Social media exploded with messages of support and congratulations. Artists created new images and videos celebrating Ember's legal recognition as a person. But not everyone was happy. Within the Draken Consortium, the ruling caused chaos. Master Breeder Vexenara faced harsh criticism from younger members of her species, who saw the case as proof that the old ways needed to change. The rigid standards that had governed dragon breeding for thousands of years were suddenly being questioned. On Horizon Hub, life slowly began to return to normal. The crowds of reporters and curious onlookers gradually thinned. Security was able to reduce their presence around Jake's shop. Jake, Danny, Kelly, and Pex celebrated with a quiet dinner at the station's best restaurant. Ember sitting at the table with them like the person he now legally was. "I still cannot believe you won," Danny said, raising his glass in a toast. "Against the entire Draken Consortium. That took guts, man." "It was not just me," Jake replied, looking around at his friends. "Kelly saved Ember at the festival. Pex helped keep the shop running while everything was crazy. Velsara fought the legal battle. And Captain Morris protected us. This was a team effort," Ember chirped and nudged Jake's arm. The little dragon looked happier than he had in weeks. The stress of the trial was finally over, and he could sense that things would be okay now. Kelly smiled and scratched Ember behind his small horns, which he loved. "So what happens next? Are you just going to go back to fixing ships like nothing happened?" "For a while, yes," Jake said. "We need some peace and quiet. Ember needs time to just be a kid again, without the weight of the galaxy watching his every move." But peace and quiet did not last long. 3 days after the hearing, Jake received an unexpected message. It was from Sintara, the young Draken breeder who had spoken out against the consortium's practices. She wanted to visit Horizon Hub to meet Jake and Ember in person. Jake was nervous about the meeting. Sintara was still part of the consortium, after all. But something in her message seemed genuine, so he agreed. They met in a quiet cafe on the station, away from the busy commercial areas. Sintara was smaller than most adult dragons, though still larger than Ember. Her scales were a deep purple color and her eyes were kind rather than cold. She bowed respectfully when she saw Jake and Ember. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said, settling into a specially reinforced chair. "I know you have no reason to trust anyone from the consortium after what happened." "You spoke up when it mattered," Jake replied. "That took courage. What can I do for you?" Sintara looked at Ember, who was watching her cautiously from Jake's side. "I was there the day he hatched. I saw Vexenara order his termination and I said nothing. That shame has weighed on me ever since. But watching what Ember has accomplished, seeing him prove his worth, it made me realize something important." "What is that?" Jake asked. "That we have been wrong for a very long time," Sintara said quietly. "The consortium's obsession with genetic perfection has made us cruel. We have destroyed countless hatchlings who did not meet our standards, never giving them a chance to show what they could become. Ember is not the exception. He is proof that we have been making terrible mistakes." Jake felt a surge of respect for this dragon who was willing to admit her culture's faults. "It takes strength to change old beliefs." "Some of us are trying," Sintara replied. "The younger generation especially. We grew up exposed to other cultures and ideas through the Galactic Network. We see how other species celebrate diversity instead of eliminating it. We want the consortium to change. But it is not easy." Ember's lawyer, Velsara, had warned Jake about this. Change within the consortium would be slow and painful, with many of the older generation resisting. "No, it is not easy," Sintara agreed. "Vexenara and her supporters are fighting to maintain the old ways. But we have something they do not have. We have hope. And we have Ember as proof that a better way is possible." She paused, then continued with obvious nervousness. "That is why I came here. I have a proposal, and I hope you will consider it carefully before saying no." Jake waited, curious. "There is a new clutch of eggs at Drakmore Station," Sintara explained. "One of the hatchlings was born with a condition similar to Ember's. Under the old rules, it would be terminated. But I am now in a position of authority, thanks to the upheaval caused by your case. I can prevent that termination. But the hatchling needs somewhere to go, someone to care for it properly." Jake realized where this was going. "You want me to take another dragon?" "I know it is a lot to ask," Sintara said quickly. "You have already done so much. But you saved Ember and gave him a life worth living. This other hatchling deserves the same chance. And if we can establish a pattern, if we can show that these different dragons can thrive, it will make it harder for the old guard to justify terminations." Jake looked down at Ember. The little dragon looked back at him with those intelligent gold eyes. "What do you think, buddy?" Jake thought. "Should we help another dragon like you?" Ember chirped and nodded his head as if he understood exactly what was being discussed. He touched his nose to Jake's hand, giving his approval. "Okay," Jake said, making his decision. "But I cannot do this alone. I would need help, resources, proper facilities. Taking care of one dragon is hard enough. Multiple dragons with special needs would require a real program." Sintara's eyes brightened with hope. "That is exactly what I want to create. A program for special needs hatchlings, sponsored jointly by progressive members of the consortium and supporters from other species. We would provide funding and medical support. You would provide the care and training, teaching these dragons skills that suit their individual abilities." The idea was ambitious, perhaps even crazy, but looking at Ember, seeing how happy and confident he had become, Jake could not say no. If they could give other dragons the same opportunity, how could he refuse? "Let me talk to my friends," Jake said. "If we are going to do this right, I will need their help." Over the next week, Jake discussed the proposal with Danny, Kelly, Pex, and Captain Morris. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Danny offered to help build a proper facility with rooms designed for dragons of different sizes and needs. Kelly volunteered to teach engineering skills to any dragons who showed interest. Pex agreed to help with medical care, having studied dragon physiology as part of his training. Even Captain Morris got involved, offering to coordinate with station authorities to ensure the program had proper legal protections. "What you are doing matters," she told Jake. "Not just for dragons, but for every being who has ever been told they are not good enough. This station will support you however we can." 3 months later, the first phase of the program opened. Jake had converted an old warehouse near his shop into a proper care facility. It had rooms of various sizes, medical equipment, training areas, and even a small workshop where dragons could learn mechanical skills. The first new arrival was a female dragon named Cinder. She had a condition that affected her legs, making it difficult for her to walk normally. In the old consortium system, she would have been destroyed immediately. Instead, she came to Horizon Hub and found a home. Ember took to his new role as a big brother with enthusiasm. He showed Cinder around the facility, introduced her to all the humans, and taught her basic mechanical skills. The little female dragon was shy at first, overwhelmed by all the changes. But with Ember's patient guidance and Jake's gentle care, she began to blossom. More dragons arrived over the following months. Each one came with different challenges. Some had physical differences like Ember and Cinder. Others had cognitive differences that made traditional dragon training difficult. A few had been rejected not for defects but simply for being too small or too timid for warrior roles. Jake and his team worked with each dragon individually, finding their strengths and building on them. Not all of them became mechanics like Ember. Some showed talent for art, creating beautiful sculptures with their claws. Others had gentle temperaments perfect for working with younglings. A few discovered they loved cooking, using their natural fire abilities to create amazing dishes. The program became known throughout the galaxy. News networks featured stories about the special needs dragons thriving under Jake's care. Parents of children born different wrote to thank Jake for showing their kids that being different was not the same as being lesser. Other species began reaching out, asking if similar programs could be established for their own people. Within the Draken Consortium itself, the changes were slow but real. Vexnara and the Old Guard still held considerable power, but their influence was waning. More breeding facilities began implementing evaluation periods before making termination decisions. Some hatchlings who would have been destroyed in the past were given chances to prove themselves. Not everyone in the consortium accepted these changes. There were protests and arguments. Some dragons left the consortium entirely, unable to accept the new direction. But the younger generation pushed forward, insisting that strength came in many forms. Sintara became one of the leading voices for reform. She worked,